There was a moment where I think my brain actually left my body when I walked out on stage with Melissa Gilbert. It was like, this is what it must have felt like to be a Beatle.
Welcome to Land of Laura, the irreverent yet scholarly podcast about all things Laura Ingalls Wilder. If you know the name Chris Czajka, it may be because he produced PBS's American Masters film, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Prairie to Page, released in late 2020. Or maybe it was in 2024 in Simi Valley, California, when he took the stage to moderate panels with cast members at the Little House on the Prairie TV show's 50th anniversary reunion and special. But there's just so much more. Chris's day job may be with New York City PBS station WNET, but his entire life seems to be full-on Little House, more than anyone I've ever met. And he's here today in the studio to tell you all about it. Welcome, Chris Czajka. You are on the podcast today because everybody needs to know about your Little House coded life. Usually we ask guests for their origin story, but I kind of think your whole life might be an origin story. So let's start at the beginning. How did you become a Little House fan?
Okay, so this goes way back. I was a child in the 1970s, those many years ago. My first exposure to the Little House books was in first grade in reading group, and there was an excerpt from Little House in the Big Woods in our reading group textbook.
Where is this?
This is in Rochester, New York, Western New York State.
Okay.
So we read, it was the Two Big Bears chapter from Little House in the Big Woods. And it was that sort of scenario where everyone was up at the front of the room in our reading group, and we were all around a table, and we were all taking turns reading. So this was still fairly, I had only been literate for a year or two at that point. I don't think the story, because it was just presented as a story. We weren't told this was from a larger book. We weren't told that this was part of a larger story. And I was very much focused on reading my part out loud correctly. So that was in first grade, and it didn't occur to me until later that that was the first time I had been exposed to the Little House books. The next year, in second grade, my second grade teacher, who was a fantastic teacher, she yanked out me and two of my other classmates from the regular reading groups, and she put us in what she called the independent reading group. Rather than having us read out of the reading textbooks, she assigned us to read different novels as our reading textbooks. So me and one of my very best friends and another kid were all put in this accelerated reading group. As part of that, she assigned us to each pick one of the Little House books to read as part of our classwork. I picked Little Town on the Prairie. I have no idea why I picked Little Town on the Prairie, but I did. I read that, loved it. The mouse chewing Pa's hair made a huge impression on me. I thought it was hysterically funny and gross. And then thereafter, on the back of that book, of course, it said that, all of these books are in the Little House series, and that's what propelled me to read all the others. So pretty quickly, I believe, over the course of the rest of second grade, I read all of the books and then began rereading them and rereading them and rereading them. It took me a little while, and I still don't understand why, but it took me a little while to put together that Little House on the Prairie, the TV show, was based upon Little House on the Prairie, the books. It just, for some reason, did not occur to me, despite the fact that at that time, the TV show was on primetime television.
But you were watching the TV show and reading the book simultaneously?
Yes. And this was, of course, in the time before we had cable television. The TV show was in syndication, freshly in syndication. So there were times where I may or may not have watched the TV show 3 times a day because it was on, at 4 o'clock, it was on at 6 o'clock, and it was on at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I became very, very steeped in both the books and the TV show, which to this day, I'm one of those people who sees the value of both, recognizing, of course, that the TV show is a wild departure from what Laura wrote, but also understanding that the TV show has brought legions of fans from all over the world to the books themselves.
So you can code switch easily between...
I can code switch. I can code switch between book and TV show.
Did the books compel you to want to visit Laura's home sites?
Yeah, and it's very funny because this, the same time that Donald Zuckert's biography came out, and I read that after having read all of the books. And I remember very, very clearly that at the back of that book, there was a listing that said, you can go and visit many of Laura's home sites. And here's how you can right away send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and they will send you information about the different home sites. And I remember very clearly walking out into the kitchen of my childhood home and saying to my mother, "Can we go on vacation to Minnesota?" And she was like, "No, why would we do that?" So I was like, "Well, you can go visit, you can see where the dugout was from on the banks of Plum Creek. And I really would like to do that." My mother was like, "Yeah, we're not going to Minnesota on vacation." I think my mom was like, "We don't want to go from one cold environment to another cold environment for vacation." So it wasn't until I was in college that I went to the home sites for the first time. But kind of between reading the books and getting hooked on the TV show, I would without a doubt say that the books inspired my love of history. Once I had read the Little House books and kept reading them and kept rereading them, I started getting just really interested in all aspects of history, mostly American history. Right about the same time, one of my mom's good friends who knew that I loved the Little House books, she was on a road trip out west and she bought me a set of McGuffey readers in an antique store. So that was really exciting. So I really started to develop this sense of history, and I loved local history, and I just got really excited in learning more about the past, and absolutely the Little House books were the gateway drug for that. So I expanded my horizons to learning a lot about the settling of the West because of the Little House books. So I was reading about Lewis and Clark, and I was reading about the Donner Party, and I was reading about the Transcontinental Railroad. So all of that stuff was really up my alley as a kid because of the entry point being the Little House books. I did not major in history in college, but I did, have the flexibility when I was in college to sort of dabble in a little bit of Little House. When I did take a history class, I would always find some way to tie in my final paper or my project to westward expansion, homesteading, things like that. And I also took several children's literature classes in college and always neatly found a way to sort of sneak in Little House. So really, from the time I was in second grade, all the way up through college, I was devouring all the information I could learn about Laura, which was not a ton back in those days.
No,
and then
it wasn't.
all of the information that I could learn just about the settling of the West. So by the time, I was, kind of midway through college, I knew basically everything that was available because, again, this was before the flood of academic research and writing about Laura had come out, which really sort of started in the mid-90s. So I had absorbed everything I could, not only about Laura and the Little House books themselves, but about the larger world of westward expansion, the settlement of the frontier, homesteading, all sorts of stuff like that.
And was your trip to the home sites during college, did you go to more than one home site, and was that your only trip?
I went to college in Chicago, and I got a summer job in Southern California. So a friend and I were going to drive from Chicago to Southern California. It was the first time I had ever driven across the country, or rather he drove across the country and I sat and read the maps. And he basically said, "You figure out where we're going and how we're going to get there and where we're going to stay." And I very carefully plotted our route so that it took us through Pepin and Walnut Grove and DeSmet and Keystone. He had no interest, still has no interest in this to this day, but I sort of hijacked the trip and got us to go to a number of the home sites, which was great. And just an incredible experience. Because I think the thing that freaked me out the first time, particularly in Plum Creek, you just feel like you've been there before. If you are very, very, very deeply aware of the novel, you get to Plum Creek, the place, and you feel like you've been there before. And it's just an overwhelming sense of history and a testament to Laura's writing that you feel like you've been there before. I bought a copy of Little Town on the Prairie in DeSmet, and I had them stamp it at the museum. But I had never had a uniform box set of the Little House books. I had like the TV tie-in edition of Little House on the Prairie. I had a weird library hardcover copy of On the Banks of Plum Creek, but I had never had a box set. After that trip driving across the country, I was on my day off from my summer job, and I was in San Diego, and I bought myself the blue box set. So that at age 20 or 21, that was the first time I actually had a proper box set of the books and not my sort of random assortment of Little House books. And then you went to graduate school, moved back across the country to New York City, and then ultimately ended up in 2000, I started a job at WNET, which is the PBS station in New York City, which was exciting. And about a year into my tenure at WNET, my boss called me into her office and she said, there are these people downstairs and they're going to be making a reality show, and it's all about Little House on the Prairie, and they are from England, and they really don't know much about this whole time period that they're making this show about. And I was in this meeting and I said to them, I have this lunatic who works in my department who knows everything about what you're going to be making this show about. You should talk to him. And I'm the lunatic. So I went and met with the producers of that show, which ultimately became Frontier House. And over the course of an hour, they were asking me, they hadn't picked where they were going to be filming yet. I lobbied strongly for South Dakota. They ultimately went to Montana. But they were asking me questions about food and where would they have gotten things and what was the story. And I just happened to know all of this stuff off the top of my head. So they drafted me into being a historical consultant for Frontier House, which was on PBS back in, I believe it was 2002. And was one of the highest rated PBS shows in history. Well, at least at that point. It may have been superseded by now that it's 23 years later. But I got to do all sorts of fun stuff. I got to sort of sift through records and diaries from the county and the area where they were filming the show to help them outfit the settlers' cabins. I wrote a bunch of historical essays because this was back in the days when PBS would produce a really lavish website for each of its primetime productions. So I wrote a historical essay. One came out a week for a whole period of time. I helped our web team design some interactive games based on the history of the era. So that was a really, really fun gig. And then it was really exciting to see how the show turned out and got people thinking about the frontier era.
But tie into Little House even further, there was a Frontier House event in DeSmet, was there not?
A Frontier House event in DeSmet? No.
Oh, I went to it.
Oh, I was not involved with it. I was not aware of it.
Wow. Yes, there was an event in DeSmet. I was just talking to one of my Little House friends about this because we both went, and I think there was a producer there or something. But yeah, it was an event. There was a talk given about Frontier House at the church that the Ingalls attended in DeSmet. And like a Q&A session, too.
It might have been the lead researchers, Linda Peavy and Ursula Smith.
Linda Peavy sounds very, very familiar.
Yes. So it's very possible that she was out in DeSmet doing something. If you remember the show, they were the kind of the head judges on the domestic side of things. So that would make sense for them to have been in DeSmet. Okay.
So you finish with...
So I finished with Frontier House, and now it's 2003, 2004. Fade in, fade out. There were a couple. I think somewhere in that period of time was when I went to Mansfield for the first time, which was fantastic. Yeah, that was just you go on vacation. You go from New York City to Mansfield, Missouri.
Exactly.
And then the next Little House development was I happened to be reading something in the New York Times or somewhere that said a musical of Little House on the Prairie was going to have a reading in New York City, starring Melissa Gilbert as Ma and Patrick Swayze as Pa. And the back of my skull blew off, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to find a way to go and see this. At that time, I had previously, prior to working at WNET, I'd worked in New York City theater, so I know people in the theater world. I tried like hell to get a ticket to that reading of the musical and didn't manage to get one. But I knew that it was sort of in the works. Like a year later, I had heard that it was going to be at the Guthrie in Minneapolis, its first sort of full-blown production. Patrick Swayze was no longer involved with it, but Melissa Gilbert still was. So a friend of mine, her job at the time, she was working at a performing arts center, I believe in North Carolina. She books touring Broadway productions into theaters. And they were doing sort of a performance for tour bookers. And she came to me and said, hey, you'll never guess, I have been invited to a performance of Little House on the Prairie, the musical, at the Guthrie in Minneapolis. Would you like to come see it with me? Because they're sort of pitching it to bookers at theaters across the country. I was like, yes, I'm there. I am coming with you. So we went and saw the show. And because of the fact they were pitching the show to bookers across the country, there was a reception afterwards, and the producers were there, and Melissa Gilbert was there. And I saw the performance. I really enjoyed the show. But there were a few moments in the show where I was just like, oh, like there were things that were historically incorrect, and not big things, but things where it was like, why would you have said this when it's an easy fix just to say the real thing?
Can you think of any examples that you thought of at the time?
I can remember there was something about, I think it was Pa's going to Volga, and they said Huron. And I was like, no, and he was going to go, do the hand cart. And I was like, it's just as easy to say Volga instead of Huron. So at this reception, I introduced myself to one of the producers of the show. And I was like, hey, I'm a big time Little House fan, really enjoyed the show, but I don't think you understand the depth to which people are going to be coming to this show knowing some of the little things that you've tweaked or changed or are historically inaccurate. And I was like, so I would like to offer myself up to you as a historical consultant, because I happen to know all of this stuff off the top of my head. And he was like, well, what else would you recommend? And I was like, well, this and this and this, rattled off this list of things that they could do and fix. So I actually ended up working with them after it left the Guthrie and before it went on national tour. If you saw the show and if you have the souvenir program, all of the historical information that is in the souvenir program is stuff I wrote. I also wrote an educator's guide for them. I also got to, and it was a lot of fun, they sent me out to, and this was like worlds colliding, but they sent me out to a cast reunion. There was a Little House TV show cast reunion in Keystone the summer, like the August before the show went on national tour. So figuring that there would be a lot of people very interested in Little House on the Prairie, the musical, at this event in Keystone, the musical sent me out there, and I did and this is foreshadowing of things to come later, I did a trivia contest. And the prizes from the trivia contest were tickets to see the musical in the city of your choice. So that was a lot of fun. It was a cast event, and there were probably about a dozen cast members there. And then as part of the 3 days worth of festivities or whatever it was, I ended up doing this trivia contest that asked trivia questions about the books, the TV show, Laura's actual life, and it was amazing what people knew. I thought I had written these like really tough trivia questions, but the people who were in that event in Keystone, I was like, oh yeah, these aren't tough at all. So I learned my lesson for later. So that was 2008. And then the next chapter was, as part of working at WNET, we produce the series American Masters, which is the big biography series on PBS. And for years, I had been thinking, we should do an American Masters on Laura Ingalls Wilder. But I always sort of kept it in my back pocket because I felt like I needed to know, what was exactly the right moment to do that. And it was, calling back to one of your former podcast guests, the trigger event was reading Bill Anderson's Selected Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder, because there's a line in the introduction to that book where Bill says, essentially, this is it. There is no more well of words that she wrote that we can pull from. Everything that's going to be published is published with the publication of these letters. And that was the moment where I said, all right, now is the time. So I marched myself off to the executive producer of American Masters, and I didn't tell him who I was pitching him. I basically just typed up a list of statistics. And it was like, this person has sold X million number of copies of books in the last 80 years. There are 7 museums dedicated to this person's memory across the entire country. A TV show based on this person's life and books has been on the air for whatever it was at that point, 45 years, and has never been off the air. And I slid this paper across the table to him, and he read the paper. And he was like, I have no idea. Who is this? And I said, oh, it's Laura Ingalls Wilder. And he was like, from like the Michael Landon show?
Were you already known to everybody as the Little House lunatic? I
was known to some people as Little House lunatic. He did not know that I had this. So when I revealed to him who it was, he was like, this sounds like a great project. And then, of course, being public media, the next step was we had to raise the money to produce the film, which was a process that took just about 2 years to secure all of the funding. I am not a filmmaker by trade at all. I developed the idea for this film. I worked on the fundraising aspects of this film. I did some of the interviews for this film, but we brought in a writer-director named Mary Murphy, who had produced previous American Masters films, including a fantastic film about Harper Lee. She was brought in to write and direct and sort of shape the whole thing. But once we got the funding, we went from 0 to 900 miles an hour, and we started pulling the film together. Interestingly, when we were sort of midstream on producing the film, the world shut down for COVID. So we had been filming all across the country. We had gotten tons of footage, but there was still a lot of stuff we needed to get. And then the COVID lockdowns happened. So if you watch the film very closely, it's hidden fairly well. But there were several of the talking heads, people that we interviewed, who we actually interviewed in their backyards. The film crew would go set up the shoot, put up a backdrop, and we would interview people outside. We were on Zoom because we couldn't travel. So we were on the computer conducting the interviews. The talking heads were responding to us, and we were outside. And I remember Pamela Smith Hill was in her backyard in Oregon, and there were a lot of airplanes flying over, and there were birds in the trees that kept chirping. So we would have to pause, and it ended up taking an inordinate amount of time because there was so much background noise that we had to contend with. But Pamela and a few other folks we actually interviewed over Zoom with a remote camera crew, standing 15 feet away from the subjects as we were interviewing them. So we said we had our own Little House-like hardships and privations as we were trying to get the film completed. And then the other compounding factor was things like museums and archives were shut down. We couldn't access stuff. So it was a journey and a trial. And then we actually got it on the air, and it was sort of perfectly timed given all the horrendous stuff that was happening in the world with the pandemic, but it was broadcast like 3 days after Christmas in 2020. So, in the midst of everyone being home and not being able to go out into the world and having their own sort of mini long winters, the film was on the last week in December 2020 and did really, really well. And super, super proud of that. In my perfect world, it would have been a Ken Burns 6-hour documentary series. But after producing 90 minutes, I'm like, I wouldn't have lived through it if it had been a 6-hour documentary series, because it was tough. And it's really tough because there's such a lack of evidence when we're talking about the first several decades of Laura's life. There's not a lot of photographic evidence to show. So you can show pretty landscapes and you can show home sites, but there's just not a lot of visuals to accompany the film. So learned a lot about documentary filmmaking and the process and, what you sort of have to leave on the cutting room floor as you mold and shape a film.
I was very impressed with the breadth of talking heads that you interviewed for the film. I mean, everyone from Carolyn Fraser, who won the Pulitzer for her biography Prairie Fires, to Bill Anderson, who has been studying Laura Ingalls Wilder and her life forever, Pamela Smith Hill, and even Roxane Gay, who I was surprised to find out was a great Little House fan. I mean, it was impressive.
Yes. Hardcore bonnethead. She's actually published pieces about her love for Little House. The other thing that was a gift to us was that all of our funding for the film sort of snapped into place, I believe in May of, I'm going to get the year wrong, but what year was Lollapalooza in Wisconsin? 2018 or 2019?
So there was, Brookings was 2015, Springfield was 2017, Wisconsin was 2019.
2019. So we got our funding solidified for the film in May of 2019. And it was sort of like we're rolling into pre-production and we're thinking about what is our timeline going to be. And I went to the folks at American Masters and I said, hey, wait a minute. In July, half of the people we want to interview for this film are all going to be in one place.
At Lollapalooza that year.
At Lollapalooza. So we literally, the funding snapped into place and then we immediately began planning. And we knocked out a bunch of those interviews at Lollapalooza because everyone happened to be there. So we got Carolyn Fraser, Bill Anderson, John Miller, Sarah Miller. I don't even remember who else we got there, but that was, not the people who were in backyards. We're all at Lollapalooza in 2019. So that was, a huge boost to us. I can't imagine what happened later with the pandemic if we hadn't gotten all of that content, up front right when we began shooting the film.
So that wasn't your first Lollapalooza, was it? I feel like you went to one before that. It was?
Oh, no, I did. You're right. I did. I went in 2017. I went to the one in Springfield, Missouri, because that was when the film was sort of in development. We had not secured our funding yet. And I went and did some preliminary interviews with some folks to kind of help us as we were developing the proposal for the film. So yeah, went to the 2017 Springfield one, and then we came back in 2019 to do a lot of the interviews in Wisconsin. Yeah, Lollapalooza has been was a tremendous resource.
For listeners, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you may have debuted the trivia contest the very first time you went. Is that true?
I did. And that, that is, it's a callback to the work I did on the musical because, I knew there might be some sensitivity with like, hey, we're going to be producing a documentary and I want to come to your conference and I want to talk to everybody and blah, blah, blah. So I offered up to the organizers for the Springfield conference because I had done the trivia contest for the musical in Keystone. I was like, hey, I can do a trivia contest if you want to give. I was like, it's like bar trivia. You can, throw me on a stage and on a podium. I'm very comfortable, happy to do this trivia contest. So yeah, the murderous Lollapalooza trivia contest began at that conference. So now I think I've done it 4 times.
I think so.
And each time I make it more absurdly difficult. And never once in the 4 times I have done that trivia contest at Lollapalooza, never once has there been a question that everyone got wrong. Always somebody who is in the room knows the answer. And some of those questions are, somebody said to me at Lollapalooza this past year, like, do you know all of this stuff off the top of your head? And I'm like, oh no, I have to, I don't remember what the name of the hurricane was that Rose survived in Texas in 1967. My depth of knowledge does not go that deeply, but other people's depth of knowledge does.
Oh, that is so great. I am a big fan of pub trivia in general. I do that a lot myself. And, the whole converging of trivia in Little House is just so perfect. So tell us about your most recent Little House chapter? I won't say last because I'm sure another is going to come up, but what is the most recent Little House connection that you have ended up making?
Because the fact that I had gotten to know Melissa Gilbert both during the musical, that was the first time I had met her. And then as we were, of course, doing the PBS documentary, we interviewed Melissa. They began planning the Little House on the Prairie TV show 50th reunion extravaganza in Simi Valley, California. And as they were preparing for that event to take place in March of 2024, they wanted to identify people to come out and interview cast members. And I think originally the idea was they were going to get news anchors from LA or reporters from LA. And Melissa Gilbert actually tossed my name in the ring and said, hey, there's this lunatic
Aww.
in New York City who knows everything about the TV show and the history. And she and I had a great time, both when we were working on the musical and then when we were working on the documentary. And we had corresponded back and forth, and she threw my name in the ring. And then out of the blue one day, I got a call from the folks in Simi Valley, and they were like, would you like to come out and MC this fan festival, which was just this enormous, well, you were there. I mean, I think it was 27,000 people from all across the world converged, and yeah, it was huge.
Just a small note in here, which we found out after the recording, it was actually 18,000 people from 27 countries. Yes, it was absolutely huge. And as somebody who I've kind of gotten past the TV show and I'm all about the books, but oh my gosh, it was awesome. It was incredible. Fantastic.
And it was so exciting to see so many people, and again, there's divisions between book people and TV people, and then there are some people who like both. But it's like one of the things that fascinates me most is sort of the position that Laura Ingalls Wilder occupies in collective consciousness. Whether you're a book person or a TV person, no matter how you got to it, the fact that this woman who died in 1957 is so well known. There are so many children's books from the 1930s that have blown away on the wind that no one is aware of, that are forgotten. There are children's books from the 70s and 80s and 90s that have blown away and are forgotten. But the fact that because of what she did, and because of those books, and because of the appeal they've had, that 7,000 people from all over the planet would show up. If there were no books, there would have been no TV show. And the fact that all of those people would show up just, is so interesting and inspiring and bizarre.
And beautiful. It was just a huge cross section of people. You saw people that looked like, 80s goth people, and you saw homeschooling families wearing bonnets, and you saw everybody. It was just wonderful.
Yeah,
I think I decided to go very last minute, but not only did I decide to go last minute, I decided to extend my trip. I was going to leave early, and I actually changed my flight so I could stay an extra day.
And it was an out-of-body experience for me. There was a moment where I think my brain actually left my body. When I walked out on stage with Melissa Gilbert, I was like, this is what it must have felt like to be a Beatle. Because the wave of noise and applause and cheering and screaming that came out of the audience was like, I could feel it in my teeth and in my rib cage. Like the wave of sound was so loud. And I think there's a clip on YouTube of that moment. And at a certain point, I very unprofessionally and inappropriately scream, "Holy crap," into the microphone. And then we sat down and we started talking. And there was a moment where my brain just was like, how did this happen? Like, how did this happen? And it happened because when I was in second grade, my second grade teacher said, I think you should all read one of these books. So again, I know the TV series is not everyone's cup of tea, but, the TV series would not exist without the books. And I think it's just such an interesting, the relationship and between the two as the years go by is so interesting. And I don't think there's anything else like it.
No, I don't think there is either. And I think it's worth thinking about, too, that perhaps the longevity of the books, not perhaps, I fully believe this, the longevity of the books was extended due to the TV show. And,
Absolutely.
it's possible, who knows? I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, and it's more of a conjecture, but, maybe they would have gone out of print without the TV show
I think
to bring more and more fans to the books.
I think it's absolutely a possibility. Or they would be, relegated to classics, but classics that nobody reads. Not because they're not well written and not well done, but just because, people's tastes change and what kids are interested in reading changes. It always is exciting for me when you're at a home site to see people, whether they are adults or children, putting together pieces that this was a real person. That's always something that I get a big kick out of.
So much credit to you, because you really did a masterful job on the stage in Simi Valley. It was really well done. Yes. I mean, of course, Melissa Gilbert was on stage, and I don't care who I am, I was absolutely enthralled. She's just luminous and, just so much star power just radiating from her. But I remember being like, Chris is doing a really good job.
Well, we had a great time. I mean, we had a really, really fun time as we were having those conversations. And it was fun to just hear the audience reaction. I will say that during my talks, whether it was with Melissa or any of the cast members, anytime anything about the real Laura came up, I sort of jammed in. I'm like, and you can go visit Laura's house in Mansfield, Missouri, and you can go to DeSmet, South Dakota. So I managed to sort of shunt in references to real Laura and book Laura throughout that entire weekend in Simi Valley, which was also, it was a good sort of backdoor PR for real Laura.
Yes, I remember noticing that too. You did a great job at that.
I think I referenced when I was on stage with Melissa, she was bringing up one of the episodes, and the episode's title is Days of Sunshine, Days of Shadow. And I was like, stop everything. That's what Laura actually called the early years of her marriage. So like working in little tidbits like that as we were having these conversations, about the TV show.
Do you have any other Laura Ingalls work in your future that you can see right now?
That I can see right now. Oh, I forgot one. Through the documentary, I met Sarah Miller, who is the author of Caroline Little House Revisited.
Wonderful book.
So we got to know each other over the course of the production of the documentary. And then she reached out to me and was like, would you sort of do a test read of this? Would you be a beta reader? And would you also look for anything in this that I may have misstepped or gotten wrong? Or, is there anything that you react badly to? So I was very, very lucky that she trusted me to be one of the very first readers beyond a very select group who actually got to read Caroline. And I absolutely fell in love with it. Think it is a remarkable piece of literature. Sarah and I, in the years since, have become very, very good friends as she, has gone on from Caroline to other projects. So that was a thrill, and that was, again, it comes in handy every once in a while. I kind of am in a place where, this lifelong obsession and quest for knowledge has paid off a number of times. So every time I think like, oh, there's probably nothing left to do Little House related, something else pops up. So I kind of have gotten to a point, now that this has been going on for over 40 years, there's going to be something else that will pop up when I least expect it. Laura and Rose will come kind of gallivanting back into my life.
In the short time since Chris and I recorded this episode, there was, indeed, some gallivanting. The weekend before Thanksgiving, actors from the TV show, Dean Butler and Allison Arngrim, plus Pamela Bob of the YouTube show Livin' on a Prairie, recorded an episode of their Little House 50th Anniversary podcast in New York City, and Chris was on hand to assist. He collected questions from the audience for a Q&A, and then, yes, entertained them with a quick trivia contest. And even though some of the questions were, as he put it, outrageously obscure, there was someone there who knew every single answer. Land of Laura is created and executive produced by me, Sandra Hume. Special thanks to Canadian folk punk band The Dreadnaughts for our theme music, and extra special thanks to all the guests like Chris, who give so generously of their time and knowledge. I hope to see you next time. Make sure you subscribe to Land of Laura on your favorite podcast channel so you can hear about episodes as soon as they drop. As Pa says, there's plenty more down cellar in a teacup. And as Ma might have said, it takes all kinds of people to make a Little House world.